It was a shocking Texas scandal. Crystal Lee from Pumpkin Center announced that she had fallen in love with and intended to marry a boy named Wendell Hartford from Lawton, Oklahoma. It made the newspaper, and in my family, it was the topic of conversation at Thanksgiving dinner for the next 6 years. As a youngster of 5, I didn't get the problem and remarked that Oklahoma and Texas were so close that they were like sister states. My mother looked up from her mixing bowl of velvet fudge with iced hazel eyes. She turned up her mouth in that scary way mothers have and said quietly, "I am glad your great-grandmother is not alive to hear you say such things." My dad just shrugged his Yankee shoulders. What in the world is the deal here, I wondered? What could make Texans feel so superior to the residents of any other state, particularly Oklahoma? I began to canvass members of my West Texas community for answers. My Aunt Ruby simply said, "Debbie, like Governor Sam Houston said, Texas can make it without the United States, but the United States can't make it without Texas." Uncle Luther looked up from his picture puzzle and said, "Hell, Oklahoma's nothing more than a big Texas county." Uncouth members of the family noted that the difference between an Oklahoma beauty and a Hereford cow is about 10 pounds. So when did all this rivalry begin? My friends, I have researched this issue since I was knee-high to a grasshopper, and I now know the answer. The fault of the feud between Texas and Oklahoma lies exactly where you would expect it, on the shoulders of the French. In the year 1803, Napoleon owned all the land west of the Mississippi. I have a pointer. West of the Mississippi. By 1819, the Kingdom of Spain owned what is now Texas, including but not limited to the 100th meridian of the Red River, wherein we find the culprit, Greer County, claimed by Texas and named after a prominent Texan. Oklahoma disputed the assignment, and after years of legal dispute, Greer County became the legal territory of Oklahoma. Texans will never forget and will roast in hell before they ever forgive. And it's a shame, really, because both states have plenty to brag about. One of the most gallant stands of courage and undying self-sacrifice which have come through the pages of history is the defense of the Alamo. And in Oklahoma, after a grueling journey, hero John Ross arrived at Tahlequah, Oklahoma, with what was left of the starving Cherokee tribe he had shepherded along the Trail of Tears. To their surprise, they were greeted by another unlikely hero, Sequoyah, a man determined to educate the Cherokee and give them an alphabet. But both states have both charming heroes and traditions, and yet there is no love lost between the states. How do you get a Texas cheerleader out of your dorm room? Grease her hips and push. And why did the Oklahoma farmer marry a cow? He had to. As I continue to ponder the Pumpkin Center scandal of an unlikely romance and the determination of Wendell to break all the rules and pursue Crystal Lee, I am reminded of the rival cultures. I find it fascinating that the two states are alike in so many ways. Perhaps the similarities are best expressed in the comparison of the state birds. The Texas mockingbird has a repertoire of 27 different songs which the males sing to attract the females, and the male Oklahoma scissortail flycatcher performs a stunning sky dance of intricate formations to impress the females on the tree branches below. So whether you're an Oklahoma Sooner or a Lone Star Texan, north or south of the Red River, the common fact remains that the boys will do whatever it takes to get the girls. In my next story, I wanted to introduce y'all to the women in my family at my own expense. There's always at my own expense. But we do have quite a tradition in our family of women, and we're not wrapped all that tight. So this one is called A Disgrace to the Confederacy. I don't have a lick of sense when it comes to dating. I never have. I see a red flag, I think it's a parade. And if you were to hear their side of it, I'm sure the men in my past would say of me that they saw a tornado coming and thought it was a gentle Bahama breeze. And I say this in a hushed tone and expect you to keep the confidence from the ears of any fellow Texans, and the rest of y'all will keep it as your secret. I have a thing for Yankee boys. Now you must understand that to a Texan, a Yankee is anybody who lives outside of the greatest state in the Union. It started when I was 8. Well, it started before that, but something really important happened the summer of my 8th year that sealed the deal. At my father's family reunion in Minneapolis, 4 little Yankee boys wanted to kiss me. This sounded good to me. I smeared on all the red lipstick I could and told them that if they could catch me, I'd let them kiss me. The race was on and it was thrilling beyond belief. An innocent enough dalliance, but enough to doom me to a life of questionable decisions. But I'm a victim, I tell you. I come by it honest. I come from a long DNA strand of Texas women who fall for the wrong men. For reasons unknown to me, we fall for Yankees. It's true. To the chagrin and against the warnings of all of our foremothers, we're drawn to them like flies to a bug zapper. It started long ago in a little area known as Tennessee Valley, Texas. Right there. My great-grandmother, Angie Bell Thomas, was the belle of the valley with a tiny waistline and a proud demeanor. She typified Southern gentility, and her family had a distinguished history with only one tiny blemish. Angie Bell's mother, Beulah, had married a Yankee, a real Union soldier. He had money, however, so when he built a library for the entire Tennessee Valley, the community forgave Beulah, but they certainly kept him at an arm's length. Well, Angie Bell had gone to a barn dance at a neighboring county and was spotted there by one Louis Christophe. How many red flags can one person have? He was not only a Yankee, but his people were German. He was an open-range cowboy and had the manners of a goat. But he took one look at my great-grandmother and boasted to all of his fellow cowpokes that she would be his bride within a month. He asked her to the dance, and she did everything she could to remain aloof. Just after the dance, Louis rode his horse across 3 Texas counties and announced to Angie Bell that he intended to marry her. She slammed the door in his face. He rode his horse back across the county lines to camp and planned a new strategy. The next week, he again took the 3-day ride to Tennessee Valley and asked Angie's mother and father for permission to court their daughter. Beulah immediately got the vapors and retired to the front porch in a stiff-knit julep. Angie's father reluctantly consented. I'm not sure, but Louis, being a Yankee and all, I suspect money was involved. After a brief courtship, they were married and moved to the booming metropolis of Electra, Texas, where they lived happily for 57 years. 2 of their daughters married Texans like they were supposed to, but naturally it was my grandmother, Mary Estelle, who married a Yankee. By the time my mother came along, foolish love decisions were to be expected. Our family had garnered quite the reputation. My mother swore she would never marry outside her people and was actually quite haughty about it. The day her phone rang, my mother accepted the blind date with red and yellow caution lights blinking over her head. But she went out with him anyway. Though married to a northerner myself, my grandmother was nonetheless furious about the date and reminded my mother that this young man was not only a northerner, but he was a Minnesota native and none of his people were even remotely connected to Texas. He was an interloper of the highest order stationed at Shepherd Air Force Base and set up on a blind date with a young girl clearly above his station. On their second date, he took her to the officers club and tried to impress her by doing a high dive into the swimming pool. Unfortunately, the pool only had 4 feet of water. In the ambulance on the way to the hospital, my mother looked at Dad's bloody mouth and broken nose and saw the warning signs as clear as a bell. But my mother continued to go out with them anyway, and they kept on going out for the next 53 years. So I've decided to stop second-guessing my propensity for Yankee boys and just accept that I'm genetically predisposed. Oh, it's not that I don't enjoy the company of a good Texas man. I love the swagger and the slanged accent, but the fact is, I'm a Texan too, so I'm kind of onto their game. Now, there's something about a Yankee, the cockeyed grin, a bit of an air of regional mystery behind the eyes. There's just something about the way they kiss. I don't know what it is. What I do know is that in our decision to ignore the medley of red flags that follow the Yankee parade, the Texas women of my family just smile a little wink at one another, shrug our shoulders and say, we like what we like and we love who we love. This next story is my very favorite, and it's called White Secrets because the way to introduce you to my family, of course, is always going to be through food. Well, it really wasn't my fault. I didn't mean to destroy the barbecue grill. You see, I was just 4 years old and simple mud pies bored me to tears. So when I saw the grill, I thought it would be fun to make mud hamburgers. There was even a spatula there for me to flip the burgers, just like a real chef. So there I was, sitting by the low grill, having a blast, when suddenly from behind I heard an ominous noise, and then an enormous shadow loomed precariously over my head. I couldn't breathe. Slowly I turned my terrified head up and looked to see the 20-foot tall predator. It was Mrs. Taylor, and she was not happy. In her hand she held a gigantic wooden spoon, and her massive Piccadilly print apron flapped in the breeze. She wore a charm bracelet that, as she shook her finger in my face, rattled like a diamondback snake. With a weak smile, I pointed my trembling finger with pitiful pride at my creative triumph. She looked at my mud hamburgers dripping rusty dirt into her charcoal and looked back at me. She was not impressed. I swear I thought she said fee-fi-fo-fum. And then she threatened to tell my mother if I ever came back in her yard again. Well, I ran all the way home. Now, in my family, the only cardinal sin is to tell a lie. Roast and burn in the fires of almighty hell are long-term consequences for transgressions. When I flew through the back door, I ran straight into my mother's knees. Where have you been? What to say? Making hamburgers? Mother's eyes narrowed. Dear, with whom were you making hamburgers? Mrs. Taylor? Oh, Debbie, you precious thing. That poor Taylor woman has no idea how to even boil an egg, let alone make an icebox lemon pie. And there you went teaching her how to make delicious hamburgers just like your daddy does. And you just 4 years old. I told your Aunt Fanny that I just knew you were going to carry on our tradition of exceptional Southern cooking. And look at you, helping a neighbor in need, and a lady that frankly no one really wants to talk to. Pity really, because if she'd go to the right beautician, she could do something about that. Oh, Debbie, you are just the best little girl. I'm going to have your daddy take you out for special ice cream right after dinner tonight. I think I'll call Mrs. Taylor right now. No, Mother, that's not a good idea. But why, Debbie? Oh, right, no need to embarrass her. We'll just keep this our little secret, you sweet thing. Phew, I thought, it's over. Tragedy averted, and I didn't have to lie. Clever, clever me. And now it's a little white secret between Mom and me. How special. Until Sunday, when we picked up my grandmother to go to Electra to see Aunt Fanny and the rest of the family. Estelle, my father bragged, your granddaughter is a girl after your own heart. Why, even at her age, she helped a poor neighbor lady learn how to make hamburgers. Why, Bill, my grandmother replied, you sound surprised. Debbie's been taught by the best cooks in Texas. Of course she did. Debbie, what spices did you use in the meat? Well, see, Mrs. Taylor, well, her stuff was kind of, it was dark and rocky, and why these people insist upon using that old coarse ground pepper? Well, I will never know. My mother saved me. My grandmother added, you are so right, Nita. Luther Grady close to choked on one of those peppercorns just last month. No cook worth her salt would ever use bad pepper. Well, let's go, Bill. We'll be late for church. Finally, it was done. It was over. Church gossip would save me from revisiting the horror of this story. Fanny, my grandmother chirped to her sister, looks like we have a natural-born cook in the family. Debbie taught some poor unfortunate neighbor woman who doesn't know a pecan from a walnut how to make hamburgers. Hamburgers, Aunt Fanny complained. Why didn't Debbie teach her something more substantial like fried chicken or biscuits and sausage gravy? For heaven's sakes, Aunt Fanny, my mother defended. Debbie's only 4 years old. Well, that's true. Debbie, did you teach her to add a teaspoon of sugar and mix it up with her hands? She had a wooden spoon. Wooden spoon? All three women gasped and clutched their chests in horror. Well, no wonder the woman can't cook. Estelle, maybe we should go visit this woman and give her our family cookbook. No, Aunt Fanny, not a good idea. It's all right, my mother saved me again. We don't want her to feel worse than she already does. And the matter was settled. And off we went to the Baptist church where we were all saved again. As I listened to the preacher admonish sinners, I felt the reprieve of lies by omission. I didn't really lie. And besides, it was all over now until every year from thenceforward as the story was retold every time I learned a new recipe. This will be easy for you to master, Debbie. You've been a great cook since you were 4. From delicious southern dumplings to never-fail barbecue sauce, the tale was repeated. And now the charge comes to you, the story stands, and I'm counting on you never to correct it. I had a lovely quiet moment with my mom, my dearly departed mother, at the Grand Canyon. She passed away a few years ago, and as I was moving to California, I became concerned about my memories of her cooking. Did I have the secret white meringue shell recipe? What about her melt-in-your-mouth pecan pie, the meatballs? Then I panicked. What was that special trick she had with turkey stuffing? Right, it had something to do with the sage, but how much did the recipe call for? Then in the quiet of the moment, wafting over the pink mist of the canyon, I heard my mother's sweet voice as clearly as I'm speaking to you now. Oh, honey, it was just a pinch. Easy for you. You've been a great cook since you were 4. I love the idea that I grew up in an era that was so much, it seems so much less complicated than the world today. And this little story comes with a visual aid, the swimming pool. And this one is called, I love this one too, it's called Diving Boards. I love my little swimming cap. I adore my entire collection, actually. The one I insisted on wearing around the house, and certainly in the bathtub, was a little rubber blue cap with a pink and yellow daisy on the side. I thought I was the height of fashion, and I was just 3 years old. Being in stylish vogue was so much simpler then. My family loved the swimming pool experience. My sister and I got along and were kind to each other. Mother was relaxed and smiling, and Daddy fixed ginger ales and bowls of snacks on the umbrella table by the diving board. We loved the Terrace Hotel in Austin. When we went to this particular hotel on our summer vacations, I wore my most special bathing cap, the one my grandmother bought me, that was beige with rainbow-colored rubber fringe. One time, during a light spring shower, my dad let my sister and me swim in the pool during the gentle summer drizzle. I can't think of anything I considered more quixotic than swimming in the rain. That marvelous feeling of elation and unabashed thrill was so much simpler then. The Gibraltar Hotel was the family favorite. Now, it's a long drive from Wichita Falls to Paris, Texas. On the way, we'd always stop in Honey Grove, where Davy Crockett camped on his way to the Alamo. Aunt Fanny and Uncle Leroy's East Texas friends, Thelma and Shorty, lived 9 miles south of Paris in Glory, Texas, and we would go to visit. Glory had a population of 50, and it remains the only spot in Lamar County with 2 cemeteries nearby. The long drive from west to east Texas was made bearable by the fact that we would soon be at the vintage 1915 Gibraltar Hotel, where we would get in our swimsuits and hit the pool. Later we would go to the movies at the Plaza Theater, and I would dream my dreams of stardom. Those dreams would carry me through the 3 days and nights of nightmare live-in chat sessions that never seemed to end. Strategies for enduring familial obligations were so much simpler then. And it was at that very pool near the Texas border that I decided it was time for me to learn to dive. My big sister was so graceful and could swan dive like Esther Williams. I wanted to do it too. So when I was 3 and a half, I had my sister stand guard by the side of the pool while my dad treaded water just under the board. In my powder pink swimming cap, I dived like a pro, and half the water in the pool went up my nose. I'm sure I looked ridiculous trying to be graceful, but I didn't care. I was ready to do it again. Being fearless and knowing that I could accomplish anything was so much simpler then. Happiness, self-esteem, and joy came at such a low price when I was young. Maybe it was West Texas itself, with uncomplicated people who learned to handle barren landscape and hot humidity with straightforward values, finding contentment playing guitar and singing on the front porch. These days, the Gibraltar Hotel has been replaced by a Motel 6, and Paris has added a metal replica of the Eiffel Tower with a big red giant cowboy hat on top. Glory, Texas now has a population of 58 and a Starbucks. Time has marched on. Today, as I spend $179 at the makeup counter trying to overcome the ravages of time and gravity, I remember how easy it used to be to feel pretty and austere, oblivious to awkward social self-consciousness, those wonderful years when the effort was its own reward, and pondering the smell of a magnolia blossom was awe-inspiring. I long for the days when I just put on my little swimming cap and jumped in the water, basking in the certainty that I would always bob back up to the top. It was all so simple then. How many many other natural blondes are in the room besides me? Good. No hands went up. Come on. This little story is called Hey Blondie. We were summoned. I hated those phone calls. Mother would announce that we were going over to the grandparents' house to visit with some relatives. And the demand always came in the middle of a game of kick the can or ollie ollie oxen free. On that Saturday, I was outside when Grandma called, and I knew it meant that I had to take off my favorite corduroy overalls and put on the black and white check taffeta dress and stiff petticoats that I hated. Mother yanked a comb through my hair and gave finger-pointed warnings about off-limit topics. Deborah, don't you dare ask about anyone's age, the liver spots on their hands, why they smell like pond water, or why their arms jiggle. She threatened as she strapped my feet in the uncomfortable black patent Mary Janes. This must be somebody important, I thought. As we drove across town, I pulled at the hem of the dress and tried to remove my socks, wondering who we had to visit with this week. It was grandfather's cousins, Grover and Maud, come up to Wichita Falls from Humboldt, Texas. I have fuzzy memories of this house call, but I do remember one thing that he said to me, a core message that I have pondered to this day. After preliminary discussions of who had died recently in their hometown, Cousin Grover invaded my private airspace, leaned his freckled head and cigarette-stained breath in my face, and said, "Well, hello there, little blondie. My goodness, that's sure enough is some white hair. You know, Missy, blondes have more fun." Leaning in beside him with her huge breasts testing the buttons of a see-through seersucker print house dress, Cousin Maud chimed in with a reprise of, "That's right, little towhead. Gentlemen prefer blondes." One of my first core personal esteem messages. I was the preferred of the species because my hair was blonde. No other reason, just the color of my hair. I was 6 and unable to deconstruct the message. I just took the information in as good news. Yay! I'm the in crowd and I didn't have to do anything to deserve it. I looked at my mother, who was a brunette, looking for confirmation that I was more special than anyone else in the world because I was a blonde. Oops. That would mean that I was more preferable than my own mother. The look I got back from Mama spoke volumes about just who was the fancy one in this family. Still, the message was there, and I think it may have saved my life. Many members of the family had always been quick to point out that I was a tomboy, headstrong, willful, determined, stubborn, and contrary. Their opinion of me was enough to send me reeling off the face of this earth. But Grover's conviction that blondes have more fun was the fuel I needed to keep going. Well, folks, Cousin Grover and Cousin Maud were wrong. I've been a wallflower a million times, and I've never heard anyone say, "Hey, you're a blonde, you're cool." It is true, however, that as Cousin Maud said, many gentlemen do prefer blondes. My first overwhelming experience of this favor occurred when we took our family trip to Mexico. Strolling through the marketplace, a chorus of, "Hey Blondie, quiero irvante a mi casa y hace lindos bailes mi contigo," permeated the sound wave frequency like lightning bolts. Not one of those eager gentlemen said, "Hey brunette." Clearly I was superior. And what a plethora of sombrero-adorned potential suitors they were. But in countries near and afar, from Texas to Yugoslavia, I couldn't help but notice that the gentlemen who clearly preferred me were holding shovels, hammers, and trinkets to sell. This fact messed with Cousin Grover's theory, which had implied some sort of Prince Charming reward for flaxen hair. When my mother was 41 years old, she, along with the rest of Texas, decided to become a natural blonde. Frosting was in and chemicals ran amok through the land as brunettes, redheads, gray ones, and black-haired ones decided that blondes indeed had a decided edge. I was incensed at best and irritated to the extreme. My resentment against these imposters caused such a blur that I was 40 years old before I knew what the expression, "Does the carpet match the drapes?" mean. And to this day, you can't swing a dead cat in the great state of Texas and not hit a bleached out blonde. Some with pitch black eyebrows. Sadly, there are only a handful of discriminating men who bother to check out the authenticity of anyone purporting to be a natural blonde. I've researched this. My male friends concur that it's the size of the cup, not the color of the pelt that matters, if you know what I mean, and I think you do. And thus have I concluded that the sound moral fiber of our nation, which has for generations perpetuated the notion that blondes have social prominence over other hair-tress-toned individuals, is irrational. I have empirical evidence which suggests that blondes, real or imagined, are in no better social shape to deal with men than brunettes, redheads, gray-headed matriarchs, or blue-haired bombshells. We are all subject to the whimsy of the male rooster, who struts with ever-changing predilection, declaring in one breath to be a leg man, and after a stroll around the hen house, deciding he is more inclined to the big-breasted chicks. Fickle are the men who are supposed to prefer the fair-haired maiden. Regardless of stature or regional heritage, men don't seem to base their penchant for sexy companionship on hair color. Rather, male preference seems to rely upon the availability of eager, naive, nymphomaniacal female volunteers more than the prepackaged coiffured beauty from a box. And as a hopeless romantic, I have written this story, which is called Swingers. When I was 3 years old, the most romantic place in the world was the swing set at the drive-in movies. I've given this a great deal of thought. Trying to remember 3 years old at my age is challenging. Wichita Falls was not exactly the hub of excitement of America, and while it's true that driving over to Burke Burnett for ice cream was a real treat, nothing beat the thrill of going out Old Seymour Highway to the drive-in, wearing little pajamas and having my sister take me up to play on the swing set while, just over my head, movie magic was happening. There is no hot like West Texas August noontime hot. Texas nights, however, are a different story. With those glorious cinematic sunsets, cascades of ginger clouds against an amethyst background, with tiny hints of optimistic silver, Texas twilight goes on forever. Amidst this backdrop, stopping for an A&W frosted root beer on the way to the drive-in and then getting to play with other kids while surrounded by the gigantic glamour of Hollywood, doesn't get better than that. It's funny looking back on childhood memories, isn't it? I don't remember actual series of events, I remember sound bites, like dancing hot dogs and popcorn that glided across the drive-in movie screen. I could not tell you a single movie that we saw at that drive-in, but I distinctly remember the wind in my hair when my sister pushed me on the swing set, and I can smell the concession stand and see the giant images on the screen. And with a little concentration, I can sniff the aroma of the huge honeysuckle bush that grew just next to the swing set. And the memories of starry-eyed passion can fill my spirit in a flash. By the time I was 5, my grandfather had become the manager of 2 theaters in Wichita Falls, downtown, the Wichita and the State. To go to an indoor theater had meant driving over to Archer City, where the theater was small but the tickets were cheap. But now my grandfather was in charge, and not only did we get to go in free, but I had permission to sit in the projectionist booth and watch movies from on high. I thought then that watching a movie screen down that stream of light was the most romantic thing in the world. My ideas of romance changed dramatically when my family moved to Alaska. During those adolescent years, the Texas sky was replaced by the aurora borealis and the cherry-crested colors that outline the mountains beneath the setting sun. Romance in those days was found in nature's new-fallen snowdrifts, giant treetops laden with pine cones, and a snowshoe stroll through the woods. When we returned to the great Southwest, I regarded romance as an outward experience. Couples holding hands, Saturday night dates to the football game, elaborate wedding ceremonies. All those became tangled in my experience in a confused web of external criteria for dreamy-eyed love. In recent years, I've gone full circle in my notions of romance. It was on my last trip with my father that it became clear. We took a father-daughter trip to Ireland, and as we walked along the riverside, having what was to be one of our final daddy talks, I got it that romance isn't reliant upon knights on white horses and external objects of affection. It's a knowing inside that the heart is a tender place where all things beautiful live. It's sharing a sky of pink poodle clouds with a father who will soon be living there. It's a peaceful feeling that comes from knowing that today I have seen the light of God in another person's face. Romance is in the bygone details of those warm summer nights in Texas when my big sister took me by the hand to the swing set and let me play as long as I wanted while my parents waited in the car. My romantic spirit comes to life when I observe in nature the struggles of a weed growing through solid concrete and living to feel the sunshine. And it is that same sunshine of the spirit that knows no bounds and transcends all obstacles and captures the romantic spirit of the human capacity for love. Before we leave Texas, I kind of wanted to shine a light on a darker side of my family. It wasn't all pink and rosy and rainbows. And so I wanted to sort of round it off with a picture of what the other side of the family was like on some of those dark moments. And this one's called Twisters. Tornadoes rage through Oklahoma and Texas throughout the spring and summer months, and they always have. But southwest cyclones are not always composed of wind, dust, and debris. Sometimes Texas twisters come in human form, and quite often they appear in the shape of God-fearing Christian women. Such a whirlwind was my grandmother, undoubtedly one of the most beautiful and toxic women I've ever known. A woman who could run a path of destruction 10 miles wide from here to Waxahachie. My parents took a business trip when I was 7, and to my delight, I was able to stay with their best friends, Frank and Rita Robertson, instead of my grandparents. The Robertsons thought I was just adorable and precious, and I got away with murder. It was late spring and already hot. West Texas dying your shoes on the street hot, when the air smells of barbecue and humidity, tarantulas fry on the sidewalks, and scorpions hide under the Baptist church steps. Because it is so ungodly hot, smells and scents linger in the air for days on end. A blooming jasmine bush can freshen the house all summer, and if the Wileys don't get that dead cat from under their house soon, we're all gonna die. Threatening storm clouds hover over the prairies like scheming vultures. The quality of the atmosphere as a tornado forms is unmistakable. The air is indescribably quiet and still, and yet you can feel the vibrations above the clouds that tell you something real bad is coming. People get quiet and move in slow motion, carefully listening to the calm. Precautious heads survey the heavens, sniffing the silence. Dads go out back and check the cellar doors, and moms check the pantry for the spare can opener and throw the window sashes open. Cars slow down and then speed homeward. Eventually the city siren blows, and everyone who is still in the house runs for cover. Those unfortunates trapped on the highways find a nearby ditch to hide and take cover and pray. That's the way it's always been. When I was 7, the feeling excited me beyond words. In Wichita Falls that spring, the sirens were blowing in short blasts because the tornado that was headed our way was gaining strength and feared to reach level 4 by the time it hit Kell Boulevard. Everyone was running for shelter except me. Frank Robertson and I were determined to watch the sky. Rita Robertson was furious with her husband. Once again, I had talked him into doing something dangerous. After that ill-fated incident at Lake Kemp with the rattlesnakes, she had made him promise never to take risks with my life again. But I was not going to miss the opportunity to see inside a tornado. Rita went to the inside closet, and Frank and I went outside, laid on our backs, and held onto the garage door handles, tucked our legs under the bushes, and waited. Promising never ever to tell my parents, I listened to Frank's Texas weather stories about the great tornado of 1943 while we stared into the black firmament. When the ground moved, my heart raced, and I held my breath as the fury of the tornado ripped down the street, screaming like a runaway freight train. I held on extra tight to the garage door and yelled for joy. The tornado was high above us, and it never occurred to me that it could swoop down at any second and rip me to shreds. I didn't care. I think part of me wished it would, just to see where it would take me. The eye of the cyclone paused just over our heads, considering its next move. I wanted it to linger there forever so I could see inside. Through the tumultuous swirl of rubbish, I could see a fluorescent blue cloud shimmering excitedly with all of nature's possibilities. Surrounding the clouds were layers of rotating rings, each overlapping the other, passing on old and new information. It's like a person, I thought. As the funnel swayed gently back and forth, making up its mind, I stayed perfectly still. Then it chose its course and headed east. As the twister passed, taking out power lines and ultimately destroying my Aunt Ruby's barn, Frank took out his little transistor radio and listened to reports that the entire city was in a blackout. All power was out, there was no telephone, no television reception. There was just stifled silence. At that point, I got a little frightened. The aftermath was far more intimidating to me than the actual event. Suddenly, piercing the silence, the phone rang. We all jumped about 5 feet, and Rita grabbed at the receiver. It was my grandmother. I come from a long line of Texas women who don't take no for an answer, and Grandma had promised movie tickets to a ham operator who got her through. She had insisted that she and my grandfather were coming to pick me up immediately. How they got through the panic-strewn streets is beyond me, but they were there within a half hour. I vaguely remember the conversation on the way home, but I was more impressed by my grandmother's determination to make sure her own were taken care of. That was the good side of Grandma, the headstrong insistence that nothing would stand in her way, the heavenly sky blue quality of a formidable spirit. We prayed, and she took me to the kitchen to make something yummy. She always had a way of disavowing anything that stood in the way of her chosen path. If it was time to make fried chicken, that's what we were going to do, power or no power. I don't know how she got that oven started. When my parents got home, all hell broke loose. Grandma called my mother every foul name she could think of for leaving us, and blamed her for taking a trip and leaving her children in jeopardy. The arc of her rant culminated in her pointed red-nailed finger over the screeched words, "You are a mistake, and I never should have had you. Nobody ever wanted you, and now you don't even want your own children." I sat on the couch absorbing the wrath and processing the information, layer upon layer of overlapping hatred. I watched my mother's face and remarked to myself that my mother took that abuse over and over again and never said a word, showed no emotion at all. My grandfather stood nearby and watched the hailstorm of hysterical vomit spewing from his wife's mouth, and he said nothing. As my grandmother stormed her insults at my mother, I watched my father standing to the side in perplexed indecision. There was no way to stop my grandmother once she got going. The woman was no taller than 5'2", but she wielded a force that no one could quantify. And then there was the hushed dissolution of generations of unspoken horror. In subsequent quiet moments, I decided to let those layers of abuse that had been passed on to me heal. I could not save my mother or change my grandmother, but I could stop the cycle from continuing to future generations. It stops now. In order for a tornado to become fierce, there must be warm, humid air near the ground, a stable layer of air above it, and then some trigger, a layer of instability farther above to set the event in motion. If any of those qualities diminish, the tornado ends. This one's called Marvin. I don't understand sensible hairstyles. I mean, I get the concept. I am college educated, and I have minors in both home economics and philosophy, but for me, when a woman points to her hair and says, "Oh, it's so easy, I just come out of the shower and go," I look at her with the awe of one listening to a complicated foreign language. I just don't get it. In my opinion, all human beings make the most fundamental decision of their lives at some critical moment in their early developmental phase, when we all look in the mirror and ask ourselves, what am I going to do with this hair? Me, I'm high maintenance from head to toe, and it all starts with my hair. I remember with vivid clarity the exact moment when I made my hairdo decision. At 13, I had Hollywood dreams while living a dreadfully boring existence in Norman, Oklahoma. I have never before or since been so desperately unhappy, but then it happened, a miracle in the midst of an early adolescent storm. In late summer, a new beauty shop appeared on Campus Corner and life became livable again. Mr. Roy had opened the most elegant haven on earth. He had come to Oklahoma from, of all places, Beverly Hills, California. I never knew how that salon landed on Campus Corner, and I do not care. I personally think God sent Mr. Roy to Norman just for me. On the corner of Campus Corner stood the charming town tavern. Along the ceiling border of the tavern were the scores of every single football game in Oklahoma University history, from the 17-8 victory of OU versus Kingfisher College in 1897. The Boomer Theater offered first-run movies for films that had already been seen by the rest of the country for a year. When Mr. Roy's Beauty Boutique opened on this quiet domain, there was quite a stir among the townfolk. Marvin was Mr. Roy's partner, and he was the most fabulous man I had ever seen in my entire life. Together they made a magnificent team. I saved my babysitting money, and my mother let me make an appointment to get my hair done. When I walked through the muted red door under the subtle sign that read Mr. Roy's Salon, it was as though the whole world went into slow motion. All the beauty shops I'd been in before had old linoleum beige floors and beauticians with cigarettes hanging out of their mouths and older women who talked about their cousins' diseases and fattening recipes. Those places smelled like chemicals and nail polish remover. Mr. Roy's Salon smelled like lavender cologne mixed with expensive couture hairspray. I just stood in the doorway taking in the Cecil B. DeMille spectacle of Greek columns draped in purple tulle, grapes and vines. Music played show tunes in the background. I was frozen with no idea what to do or where to go next. Marvin sashayed over to me in his loosely woven lilac linen shirt. He snapped his fingers and said, "Roy, you have got to get over here and look at this hair. You won't believe the color is real. What's your name, dear? Come sit in my chair. Roy, you can't have her. She's all mine." He threw a tasteful purple cape around my shoulders, fussed his hands through my hair, and said, "Roy, I believe I'm going to frost Debbie a nice champagne beige." Roy bustled angrily over to Marvin's hair station, and an animated consultation ensued. I could not hear a word they said because my mind was light years away thinking how profound these two men were, and I wondered if they would ever know that on that Saturday morning they had saved a sad and lonely little girl's life. Marvin disagreed about blue versus red color bases and my hair texture, and Roy was concerned that my hair might lose its integrity. You can picture this, can't you? For the next few years, conversations at Mr. Roy's salon were not about the gout or Hank's bleeding ulcer and sciatica. We talked about movie stars and the Academy Awards and gossip about famous people. In that little beauty parlor, two men with the personalities of the enthusiasm of delighted children and 40-foot movie screen personalities filled my life with glamour and possibility. When I went to Marvin for my prom bouffant, we gossiped and listened to the music of Porgy and Bess. As he wrapped my hair in the soft lavender towel and gently massaged my temples, he told me that he and Mr. Roy were leaving town. Roy had not been feeling well and they were moving back to California to live in the hills. I didn't know where that was, but it sounded exotic. After they left, a precious sadness filled my soul. Not so much because they were gone, but because I never really had the opportunity to tell those two marvelous creatures how deeply I loved them. This winter, I went back to Norman. I spent a little time walking around Campus Corner. I hadn't been back there for years. The town tavern has been replaced by a fast food pizza joint, and all those football scores have been painted over. The Boomer Theater is still there with the original sign, but it's an office building now. An OU t-shirt store sits halfway down the block where Mr. Roy's salon used to be. The red door has been replaced by a basic white door, and the hand-painted sign is long gone. Now, my hair lost its integrity years ago, but as I sat across the street and looked at the place where I grew up, my mind drifted back to those beauty shop days. Though it was late December, I could just smell the faint scent of lavender cologne and Beverly Hills hairspray. I closed my eyes and could see the frown of Marvin's meticulously tweezed eyebrows as he argued with Mr. Roy. I felt his perfectly manicured fingers rustling through my hair, and as I walked back to my car, I could hear, just over the spiral of the Methodist Church, beyond the clouds of today, a sweet medley of Broadway show tunes. This is called It Could Have Been Me, and there's an ice blue silver metallic cord which weaves itself through the background of the tapestry of my life, and its name is Scott Blankenship. In the 7th grade, Scott Blankenship was a dork. I had to sit behind him in Oklahoma history class and look at that scrawny neck and burr haircut all year long. Scott was nondescript. He wasn't even popular enough to have his name in any slam books. Now, slam books were notebooks that were passed around school with student names in there so you could write gossip and criticism about people. Sort of like MySpace with crude drawings of crucial body parts rather than JPEGs. The goal was to have your name in every slam book, a few pictures of your boobs, and some expletives about what a hot catch you were. Even my name was in a few slam books. Nothing bad was ever written or drawn about me. Nothing much was written about me at all. Until the October slam books of my 8th grade year, where 6 books revealed that I was the only girl in the 8th grade without a date to the cheerleaders dance. I was mortified. Subsequent books revealed that Brenda Diker also did not have a date to the dance because she had just broken up with the richest and most popular boy in school, John Skillman. And so it was by pathetic default that I went to the 8th grade cheerleaders dance with John Skillman. My mother forced me to wear a jaundiced yellow linen dress with a white daisy collar that my Aunt Ruby might have found attractive. My hair was awful because of course it was raining. I broke 2 fingernails, and by 7 p.m. I was a nervous wreck. Once at the dance, John quickly abandoned me and went to join his other buddies to spike the punch bowl. As I stood in the balloon-infested ballroom, humiliated, I looked across the floor, and there was Scott Blankenship. Well, over the summer, he had changed. He had grown 3 inches, and his hair had grown out to a shoulder-length dark blonde. He looked at me, and he started walking toward me. He was going to save me. I tugged at the hem of my hideous dress, and he got closer. My knees buckled. He got closer still. And then he looked right past me to Brenda Diker, who had come to the dance by herself just to show John Skillman who was in charge. By the end of the night, John Skillman was gone, and Scott Blankenship and Brenda Diker were the new couple. In the 9th grade, I decided to attend the WKY sock hop at the YMCA Gymnasium of Bowie County. As I sat there feeling humiliated and dejected, I asked myself why I continued to subject myself to the 7th circle of hell social events. Eventually, the inevitable mirror ball moment happened, and love couples took to the dance floor as music pierced the air with "Precious and few are the moments we took and shared." My friends and I scurried to the bleachers and sat there in humiliation in the dark shadows. I looked to my left. There was Brenda Diker. Go figure that. Well, when the song ended, we thought it was over. Finally, I stood up to move to a safe place, when suddenly another slow song started. And naturally, it was my favorite song of all times, Crystal Blue Persuasion. Good God, would this torture never end? I looked across the dance floor, and there was Scott Blankenship. By now, he was handsome beyond all belief. 6 foot tall, blonde hair, blue eyes, and though I knew nothing of his personality or his character, nothing of his integrity or spirit, the sight of him walking across that dance floor in tight jeans and a madras shirt, he was the new love of my life. I didn't even hear him the first time he asked me to dance. "Hey, Debster, come on, let's dance." Coming to consciousness, I thought, well, surely this is a ploy to make Brenda jealous. "Debbie, come on, let's dance." I looked to my left, but Brenda was gone. He was asking me to dance. It was my turn. As we danced under the electric stars, I was transported to a dimension beyond this earth. At one point, he looked down to me, smiled, and simply said, "Debster." Well, I thought I'd die. By the end of the night, Scott Blankenship was back with Brenda Diker again, but I didn't care. For once, it had been my turn to dance with the handsome prince. For once, it had been me. Cut to my 25th class reunion. Folks age differently, don't they? By the time we were 43, nobody looked the same. Stunning athletes were now bald with beer bellies. The boy most likely to succeed was in his 2nd marriage and 3rd failed business. Everybody had changed, except Scott Blankenship, handsome as ever and still running the lucrative family business. I had changed. Many of my friends had grown up to be sensible, middle-aged women with dull, neglected hair and practical shoes. I had shed the braces, the unwanted pounds, the overprocessed hair, and at the reunion, I looked fabulous. And Scott Blankenship jumped on me like a duck on a June bug. "Hey, Debster!" He called and sailed across the dance floor and grabbed me up in his arms like a long-lost love. "Well, hello, Scott," I said. "I haven't seen you since the 9th grade. Sloughing off the comment, he goes, "God, Debbie, did you see Brenda Diker? Good God, she's had 10 kids. I mean, she was always easy in high school, but who'd have thought she grew up to be a breeder? And did you see John Skillman? My God, he's filed bankruptcy. And there's Kenny McCabe just out of rehab and drinking again." I was stunned. Did I want to take a walk to the duck pond? I asked him what the woman who was invested in the ring on his left hand might think of that. He confided in me that she didn't understand him and that he couldn't leave her because she'd take all of his fortune and the children. It was just easier and a whole lot more fun to have affairs. These were the insides of the beautiful boy on the dance floor. This was the spirit of my dreamboat from the 8th grade. Suddenly, he didn't look so shiny, and those blue eyes looked cold and calculating. I declined his offer and turned to leave when, for old time's sake, the DJ played Crystal Blue Persuasion. Scott took my arm and turned into me and we danced. The song was pretty and he was still handsome and smelled of expensive aftershave cologne, and I felt nothing. I turned and walked away from him, and I placed Scott Blankenship and my slam book memories of junior high school safely in the distant landscape of the fabric of my life. And my last story of the evening is a story that I'm going to call P.S. Pre-sobriety. So it's a little colorful. And I did this one on Wednesday night for theme night, and a couple people suggested that I might do it again tonight because it's at my expense. It's all okay. It's 1982. You see, I have been asking God for a sign, but since this Oklahoma morning brings sunshine and fair temperatures just like any other July day, I feel certain that my second wedding has divine blessings. Upon awakening, I asked Jesus to give me a signal if getting married to Gary is not a good idea. I have my doubts about this matrimonial union. We argue a lot. Drinking is our acceptable form of communication. Instead of starting meaningful talks with, honey, I need to share my feelings with you, I kick off the session with, get me a drink and make it a double. Hell, just bring me the whole bottle. Oh, we are a pair to draw to, all right. Fearing that this might not be a match made in heaven, I have already consulted everyone from astrologers to palm readers to Cosmopolitan magazine to see if in fact he is the one. All signs point to no, not even close, bad idea, certain disaster. Even the Ouija board pointer darted back and forth from no to danger. Once the Ouija board pointer even spelled out death. Could these be warning signals, I wonder? And now the day is here. Wedding day, July something. I get up and look at my hair. It doesn't look blonde enough against my ruby red, freshly sunburned skin. Out come the bleach pots. I put on the peroxide and get busy with my nails and pedicure. Oops, I forgot to check the clock. No matter, I've done this a million times. Perhaps a mild alcoholic beverage. Yes, of course, just to steady the nerves. Oops. Maybe I should wash out the bleach. My hair is now fried albino straw. Oops, I don't feel well. Okay, that's over with. I'll know better than to put in too much tomato juice next time. My mother and I have planned a lovely backyard wedding. At noon, the arch arrives. The men mounted in the backyard. Expensive roses are attached in garlands over the arch. As the crew leave, the wind bellows and down goes the arch. My mother and I stand with hands over mouths. She is more horrified by my platinum frizz haircut than the collapsed arch and scattered flowers. My dad props the arch, but up with sandbags. At 2:30, the cake people arrive. We have ordered a beautiful 4-tiered Italian cream cake with a champagne fountain in the middle. At 3 o'clock, my Aunt Fanny, who has come up from Electra to help, says, Nita, did you notice that the cake is beginning to lean? Cousin Judy adds, yes, and I believe the champagne is overflowing. My mother excuses herself and goes to take a bath. I grab a cup and salvage the spilt champagne. The cake is reconstructed by Aunt Fanny, the champagne fountain is removed by Judy, and I drink the contents. The men with the back chairs arrive. Oops, they brought chairs from Rest Haven Funeral Parlor. What could this mean? I'm startled by the first bolt of deafening thunder. What in the name of God, and speaking of God, was that him trying to tell me something? No, it's probably my imagination. Until the house shakes with the next bolt and lightning splits the arch in half. Okay, seriously, God, if you don't think this is a good idea, let me know. As if on cue, a torrential downpour soaks the backyard. No, seriously, God, don't hold back. Tell me if this isn't meant to be. I take my hair down. Because of the humidity, it sticks flat against my scalp with a few electrified ends clumping at the bottom. Maybe hair mousse. Oops, glue. Okay, some hair spray. Oops, sticky glue. Oh, I'm pretty. I put on extra makeup to compensate for the bad hair. Now I look like a hooker from Mulligan Flats. I put on the pretty floral chiffon dress that I made for the occasion. The waistband comes loose. This is great. Aunt Fanny comes in to see the fiasco that is me. Why, Debbie, I don't think I've ever seen a bride look so interesting. 5:20, Gary arrives. He's been drinking all day. Mind you, Gary can't handle 2 beers, let alone a day of debauchery. He is also soaked to the bone. We strip him down to his underwear and sit him outside in the rain to sober him up. After 10 minutes, Aunt Fanny comes in and says, "You know, Nita, we might ought to bring Gary in out of the storm. Irma Jean lost 3 turkeys before they were plump enough to eat because they forgot to come in out of the rain." My father goes out to check on my fiance, closes Gary's mouth so he won't gag on the rainwater, and reports that Gary is almost ready to stand on his own 2 feet. Meanwhile, Judy steams his tuxedo and I fix myself a vodka tonic. The city's storm sirens blow at 5:45, and we prudently decide to postpone the wedding until 7 p.m. By then, the storm is sure to pass, guests will have had time to make it through the flooded, detoured streets, and all will be well. I put a hairpiece in my hair, which gives it some lift and hides part of the frizz. I sit in my bedroom, tempted to talk to the Reverend and ask him if he thinks these events are a signal that this wedding is doomed. I decide against it and put on more mascara. By 6:50, 45 people have arrived. We invited 200. These seem good odds considering the fact that the level 3 tornado pounding through the airwave warnings are going out all over the city. Oops, somebody forgot to bring Gary in out of the rain. I throw on a bathrobe and run outside in a panic and find him laying fetal position on the ground in his underwear singing "God Bless America." As my hairpiece floats into the rose bushes, I look up at the hurricane heavens and say, "God, what does this mean?" My mother sends 2 men to smuggle Gary through the side door and dress him. I go inside and survey the damage that is my hair, sop up the black mascara from the sides of my face, blow dry the frizz, and plug in the curling iron. Herman Caldwell comes at the patio door holding my hairpiece and says, "Y'all, I think there's a dead rat under the rose bush." Women begin to screech. My mother, with all the charm she can muster, gets the hairpiece from Herman, delivers it to me. We wash it, blow dry it, and stick it in my hair. I now look like I am nesting rodents. It's 6:58. I curse God for not making his will clearly known to me. At 7 o'clock, we begin the ceremony. If anybody has any reason why this, and I swear to you, a bolt of thunder that could scare the hair off a roadhog blasts through the air. And we say, I do. The remainder of my days with Gary were as tumultuous as the wedding itself, and I spent many nights wondering how it had all started out as such a normal day. If only God had given me a clue, I might have been able to miss this chapter of my life.
There's something going down in the little town south of Round Rock, Texas. They greet you with a smile like it's going out of style south of Round Rock, Texas.